This is the Canon EF 40mm f2.8, and because of its small format it's often referred to as a pancake lens. With most of my lenses I can explain why I bought them, but with this one there was no reason. I bought it because I could. It was back in the days before I was married, when I had no kids, before I bought a second house for cash, before I bought 2 more cars, and crucially before the value of the pound and the exchange rate crashed as it did a few years ago after the Brexit referendum. But that's another subject and one I don't really want to get into at the moment. At the moment it's on a Canon 40D, which is an APS-C camera, but as it's an EF lens it can be used on full frame cameras. After this one, Canon released a very similar lens which was 24mm in focal length, but that was an EFS, which meant it could only be used on APS-C cameras and not full frame cameras. In 2013 I moved to a Canon EOS M mirrorless system, and although I still use my EF and EFS lenses on that system, most of the lenses are too big and too front heavy. But this is the exception. Because it's so small and light, it actually feels very comfortable when used on an EOS M mirrorless camera. It's a very small lens, and as you can see here it's only about the same size as a 25mm extension tube. The length is 23mm, the maximum diameter is 68mm, it only weighs 130 grams, and the front filter size is 52mm. The closest focusing distance is 30 centimeters, which is quite close, and you can reduce that even further by using an extension tube. So you can actually use it for some macro work. And the minimum aperture is f22. There's no IS, but it's not really a problem with a lens of this focal length. The old rule for hand holding is that the shutter speed shouldn't be any slower than the reciprocal of the focal length. And the reciprocal of the focal length is 1/40, and most of the time I use shutter speeds that are faster than 1/40th of a second. Inside there are 6 lens elements in 4 groups, and there are 7 diaphragm blades, and this gives quite an attractive looking bokeh. Before this lens, most Canon EF lenses use an ultrasonic motor for autofocus. This was the first lens to use a stepper motor, and the reason was video. When DSLRs were first introduced, there was no video functionality. They were just used for still images, and ultrasonic motors were very good for that application. They were quick, and the fact that they were a bit jerky and a bit noisy didn't make any difference. However, in 2008, Canon released the 5D Mark II, which did have video functionality, and when shooting videos it's important that the autofocus is silent and smooth, which ultrasonic motors weren't. So stepper motors started to become a lot more popular, and since this lens there have been quite a few lenses released with stepper motors driving the autofocus system. If you use special equipment to measure the autofocus speed, you would see that it's slower compared to an ultrasonic motor, but when used in real life you don't really see much difference, and the autofocus speed is perfectly acceptable for what I need it for. The lens is good for general photography, street photography, and on an APS-C camera it becomes 64mm instead of 40, and that's actually quite a nice focal length for portraits. It's a sharp lens, it has nice colours and contrast, but the best way for you to judge that is by looking at some sample photos. It's certainly a lens I would recommend. I'm a big fan of small and light camera equipment, which is why I moved to an EOS M system. It's capable of delivering great results. The images have great colours, contrast and sharpness, and considering that it only costs around $180, I think it's something of a bargain.